Last Sunday and Wednesday, we were talking about the Roman trials. Um, we remember that Christ's Jewish trials were in 3 stages. And we remember that in our last lesson concerning Christ's Roman trials, we talked about there was 3 stages to that as well. There was the first stage before Pilate, the second stage before Herod, and now we're going to talk about today the third stage, and we'll finish up on Wednesday when Jesus goes back to Pilate. We know from the last lesson that one thing that Pilate did accomplish, one purpose he had in mind by sending Jesus to Herod was to do what? What resulted from that? Do you remember? That's right. They became friends. In fact, if you turn over to Luke 23 and 12, it says that very day, Pilate and Herod became friends with each other. For before that, they had been at enmity with each other. We're going to, all 4 gospel accounts have information concerning this lesson. We're primarily going to be in Luke chapter 23 and John, the very last part of 18, and into chapter 19. Let's go ahead and read a little bit. I will read Luke 23, 13 through 24. And Wayne, if you could read John 18, 39 through the 19th chapter, verse 16. I'll say it again when the time comes. Okay, Luke 23, 13 through 24. It says, Then Pilate, when he had called together the chief priests, the rulers, and the people, said to them, You have brought this man to me as one who misleads the people. And indeed, having examined him in your presence, I find no fault in this man concerning those things which you accuse him. Neither did Herod, for I sent you back to him, and indeed nothing worthy of death has been done by him. I will therefore chastise him and release him, for it was necessary for him to release one to them at the feast. And they all cried out at once, saying, Away with this man, and release to us Barabbas, who had been thrown into prison for a certain insurrection made in the city and for murder. Pilate, therefore, wishing to release Jesus, again called out to them. But they shouted out, saying, Crucify him, crucify him. And he said to them the third time, Why? What evil has he done? I have found no reason for death in him, and I will therefore chastise him and let him go. But they were insistent, demanding with loud voices that he be crucified. And the voices of these men of the chief priests prevailed. So Pilate gave sentence that it should be as they requested. Okay, then Wayne, John 18, 39 through 19:16.
But you have a custom, excuse me, but you have a custom that I should release someone to you at the Passover. Do you therefore want me to release to you the King of the Jews? Then they all cried again, saying, Not this man, but Barabbas. Barabbas, who was a robber. So then Pilate took Jesus and scourged him, and the soldiers twisted a crown of thorns and put it on his head, and they put on him a purple robe. Then they said, Hail, King of the Jews! And they struck him with their hands. Pilate then went out again and said to them, Behold, I am bringing him out to you, that you may know that I find no fault in him. And Jesus came out, wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe. And Pilate said to them, Behold the man. Therefore, when the chief priests and officers saw him, they cried out, saying, Crucify him, crucify him. Pilate said to them, You take him and crucify him, for I find no fault in him. The Jews answered him, We have a law, and according to our law, he ought to die, because he made himself the Son of God. Therefore, when Pilate heard that saying, he was the more afraid, and went again into the praetorium, and said to Jesus, Where are you from? But Jesus gave him no answer. Then Pilate said to him, Are you not speaking to me? Do you not know that I have the power to crucify you and the power to release you? Jesus answered, You could have no power at all against me unless it had been given you from above. Therefore, the one who delivered me to you has the greater sin. From then on, Pilate sought to release him, but the Jews cried out, saying, If you let this man go, you are not Caesar's friend. Whoever makes himself a king speaks against Caesar. When Pilate therefore heard that, he brought Jesus out and sat down in the judgment seat in a place that is called the Pavement, but in Hebrew, Gabbatha. Now it was the preparation day of the Passover, and about the 6th hour. And he said to the Jews, Behold, your king. But they cried out, Away with him, crucify him. Pilate said to them, Shall I crucify your king? The chief priests answered, We have no king but Caesar. Then he delivered him to them to be crucified. So they took Jesus and led him away.
Thank you. Sorry. At verse 16. Okay. That's wonderful. Thank you. I know that was a little bit long in the reading, but again, I think it maybe helps frame our minds a little bit to kind of see the big picture. And we will refer to Matthew and Mark in a few occasions for some stuff. But we see here that in verse 16 of chapter 23, that Pilate pronounced Jesus not guilty again. Okay? But he still, this would have been the second time he said not guilty, but he still proposed a judgment in verse 16. Says, I will therefore chastise him and release him. If Pilate found Jesus not guilty or innocent, why would he propose a punishment? To appease him, yes. I think that's exactly right. When you think about it for a minute, when we punish our children or our grandchildren, what are we ultimately trying to do? Correct them, to teach them, to train them. Change of behavior, exactly. So the primary meaning of punishment, if you will, is to teach or train. And it seems as though Pilate was saying, just let me teach this man a lesson. And in John 19:1, go over there just real quickly, it says, So then Pilate took Jesus and scourged him. There is some uncertainty among the biblical scholars, if you will, as to whether Jesus' scourging took place at this time or to appease the Jews or right before his crucifixion. Okay, a lot of discussion both ways. If you base it upon putting Luke and John together, there is a strong case for the scourging probably being an attempt to, as Galen said, to appease the Jews. J.W. Shepherd gave a description of scourging, and I'd like to take a moment and read it to you. If you have your Roper's book with you, it's on page 489, down towards the bottom, and it says this, what Shepherd wrote about the description of what a Roman scourging entailed. The scourge was a whip with several thongs, each loaded with acorn-shaped balls of lead, or sharp pieces of bone or spikes. Stripped of his clothes, his hands tied to a column or a stake, with his back bent, the victim was lashed with the whips by 6 executioners, who plied these instruments of torture with severity, almost to the point of the death of the prisoner. Each stroke cut into the quivering flesh until the veins and sometimes the entrails were laid bare. Often the scourge struck the face, knocked out the eyes and teeth. Scourging almost always ended in fainting and sometimes even in death. Geraldine sent me a link yesterday, and it's in the bottom of the page 489 there, where it talks about a graphic description of Roman scourging given from a medical viewpoint in William D. Edwards and Wesley J. Gabel, and I guess Floyd E. Hosmer, called On the Physical Death of Jesus Christ. It's about 18 minutes long. Urge everybody to look that up and listen to it. It is chilling, to say the least. Geraldine, what'd you think? Yeah, it is. It just about breaks your heart, and well, it does. It brings you to tears. I'm sorry? Yeah, for us all. Yeah, amazing. It is amazing. Besides the scourging, Jesus was also mocked by the soldiers. In John 19 again, verses 2 and 3, it says, And the soldiers twisted a crown of thorns and put it on his head. And they put him in a purple robe. Then they said, Hail, King of the Jews. And they struck him with their hands. They struck him with their hands. You know, I can imagine Pilate must have thought, when the enemies of this man see the effects of what Jesus has undergone, that will surely placate them, satisfy them. Boy, was he wrong. He was wrong. Following the scourging and the mocking, Pilate presented Jesus again to the Jews. In 19 and 4, it says, get back there in a minute, should have held my place. Pilate then went out again and said to them, Behold, I am bringing him out to you, that you know that I find no fault in him. This would have been the second time. The second time. I find no fault in him. Imagine you can picture in your mind the scene here. Blood streaming down Jesus' face from the thorns piercing his forehead on that twisted crown they made. On his back was tattered robe that had been beaten with blood from his torn back. Pointing at Jesus, Pilate said in the last part of verse 5, Behold the man. How had, question, Pilate previously referred to Jesus? What term did he use? Remember? King? King. King. But here he says the word man. And that's significant. Why do you think? Any thoughts on that? Exactly. Pilate may have been saying to the Jews, see, he is just a man who bleeds like any other man. He is not anyone you should worry about. He is not anyone you should worry about. Thoughts or questions so far? John. Yeah. Wayne. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and you're absolutely right. And we're going to get to that as we progress here. Uh, we talked about it before that Pilate was not a good leader. He was not a good governor. His sole purpose was to keep the peace among the Jews and to collect taxes, okay? But his job was in jeopardy, and he knew it. And his desire was to keep his job. That's exactly right. Um, if the governor thought that the bloodthirst of the Jews would be satisfied by this scourging that just took place, he was disappointed, certainly disappointed. Look at what the chief priests and officers said in verse 6 of 19 here. It says, therefore, when the chief priests and the officers saw him, they cried out, saying, crucify him, crucify him. Pilate said to them, you take him and crucify him, for I find no fault in him. And we talked a little bit about this on Wednesday night. This is now the third time that he has said, I find no fault in him. We talked about what double jeopardy means. Okay, it's not just a game we watch on TV. Excuse me. But if you are found innocent of a crime, you're supposed to be released right then. The very first time we go back to chapter 18, verse 38, when Pilate had talked to Jesus and said, what is truth? And he went back out and said, I find no fault in him. He should have been released. We talked about that. Not only did Jesus face double jeopardy, but triple jeopardy, quadruple, and so on and so on. So far, Pilate has said, I find no fault in him 3 times, as I said. Now, Pilate said, in effect, in verse 6, the last part of it, you take him and crucify him, for I find no fault in him. He probably thought that this would pass the buck again, but he was wrong. What law was he referring to when Pilate said, I find no fault in him? And the Jews answered him, we have a law, according to our law, he ought to die because he made himself the Son of God. Do they say he broke the Jews' law of blasphemy? Yeah, blasphemy. And notice Pilate's response in verse 8 of chapter 19 of John. Therefore, when Pilate heard that saying, he was more afraid. As Wayne pointed out, more afraid. Why was he more afraid, do you think? Yes, exactly. In Roper's book, he talked about Greek and Roman mythology had many legends about gods who had taken the form of men. And in fact, we see that in Acts, the 14th chapter, 11 and 12, where Paul and Barnabas were referred to as gods after Paul heals a lame man. And so he was afraid. Pilate was so afraid that he did what? Look at verse 9. He went back again into the praetorium and said to Jesus, where are you from? But Jesus gave him no answer. Why do you think he didn't answer him? Because, again, as has been said before, he didn't have to answer these questions. He didn't have to. He did nothing. And it was obvious to him that Jesus had done nothing either by Roman or Jewish standards. It's amazing what Jesus had to put up with. And then Pilate says this. Let me find it here. Verse 10. Are you not speaking to me? Do you know that I have power to crucify you and power to release you? Here we see Pilate trying to throw his weight around, right? Hey, do you know who I am? I have all this authority. And notice what Jesus said. You could have no authority or power at all against me unless it had been given you from above. Therefore, the one who delivered me to you has the greater sin. When he said that, the last part of that, he who delivered me has the greater sin, who was he referring to? Yeah, specifically Caiaphas, okay, and the other Jewish leaders. See, Pilate had not the same opportunities to learn about Jesus as Caiaphas had been given, and the other Jews. Further, and here's a key, the governor was not motivated by hatred like Caiaphas was. Pilate was not guiltless, don't get me wrong, but the high priest and the Jews influenced by him would have to bear the greater guilt. Does that make sense? Galen? Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure. I mean, in a riot situation, who knows what's going to happen, right? And they kept getting louder and louder and louder. You know, it reminded me one time uh, when I was working for the Riverside County Sheriff's Department, there was a call of a disturbance at Coachella Valley High School, where I went to school at. And as two or three cop cars roll into the scene, I guess a fight had broken out on the outside of the gym. And so about the time they got there, everybody inside the gym wanted to come out and see the fight. And when they did, it looked like it was a mass riot happening. And so they called for lots of backup. But you never know. You never know what's going to happen. Any other good comment, Wayne? Right. Yeah, he already had a pretty bad track record. And so anything else could have triggered a recall, so to speak. I think that's true too. Right. Any difference? Yeah. I think there's a lot to be said for that thought too. Yeah, exactly. Good comment. Anything else? Yeah. Geraldine. Oh, yeah. So very ugly. Yeah. We're going to get to it in just a minute, but I mean, the real heartbreaking twist the knife in the back comment was when they said that we have no king but Caesar. I mean, thousands of years, you know, God took care of them. Well, yeah, no, and that's right. That's right. Exactly right. Pilate came away though from this exchange more determined to find a way to release Jesus. It was obvious to him that Jesus had done nothing wrong, right, by Roman or Jewish standards. And Pilate had another trick up his sleeve to try, a tradition. Let's turn over to Matthew, the 27th chapter, please. 27th chapter, we'll start in verse 15. Twenty-seven, 15 to 31. Okay, here we go. Beginning in verse 15. Now at the feast, the governor was accustomed to releasing to the multitude one prisoner whom they wished. And there had been a notorious prisoner called Barabbas. Um, Therefore, when they had gathered together, Pilate said to them, "Whom do you want me to release to you, Barabbas or Jesus, who is called Christ?" For he knew that because of the envy they had delivered him. While he was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent to him, saying, have nothing to do with that just man, for I have suffered many things today in a dream because of him. And we'll get to the rest of it here in just a minute. This tradition, this custom, if you will, to release someone, it came during the Feast of the Unleavened Bread. It was a custom probably not originated by Pilate, okay, but something that maybe a previous Roman official had done. It's interesting to know that there's no historical record of this custom existing in Jerusalem in that day. But as we know, even today, it's not uncommon for people, political leaders, if you will, to release prisoners in an effort to gain goodwill or to gain something back, like a prisoner exchange. We see that all the time. And as Matthew says, they were holding this notorious prisoner called Barabbas. What comes to mind when you hear the word notorious? We talked a little bit about it on Wednesday. Evil, yeah, a murderer. He led an insurrection. We have that happening today, according to certain individuals in our government. I laugh, I scoff. Rabble rouser, a robber. It says in it says in Luke 23:19 that he was thrown into prison for insurrection, trying to overtake the government, the Roman government. He was a bad guy. He was a bad guy. Pilate thought that if he could restrict their choice to just two individuals, either Barabbas or Jesus, surely they would choose Jesus. Probably Pilate thought that nobody in their right mind would want someone like as bad as Barabbas back out on the streets. I mean, turn loose back onto society? I don't think so. And of course, Pilate asked the crowd, "Whom do you want me to release to you, Barabbas or Jesus, who is called Christ?" Interesting here. Why did Pilate say, when referring to Jesus, when he said, "Who is called the Christ"? Well, from heaven, yes. Been waiting for, yes. But yes. According to writings and stuff, Barabbas' first name was Jesus. Jesus Barabbas. And of course, he wanted to make sure of the distinction between the two. Yeah. As the people began to talk among themselves about what choice to make, Pilate may have thought that he finally outwitted the Jewish opponent. Surely, again, they would not pick Barabbas. But while they were waiting, and as he sat on the judgment seat, his wife came to him. Look in verse 19 of Matthew 27. The Bible says, when he was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent to him, saying, "Have nothing to do with that just," or your translations may say, "righteous man. For I have suffered many things today in a dream because of him." Because of him. It's interesting that Pilate's wife sent a message to him while he was sitting on his official judgment seat. She would more than likely have not engaged in such activity unless she thought it was significant or vital. She advised him not to have anything to do with this righteous man. Now, I don't know, and we don't know what how her interpretation of righteous would be. Neither do we know the origin of the dream from which she had suffered greatly, as it says, the previous night. The dream maybe could have come from God. We don't know for sure. Many surrounding stories surround this woman, and as Galen has pointed out before, including the claim that she was converted to Christianity after Jesus' crucifixion. Not much else is known, really. The Coptic, C-O-P-T-I-C, church, which is Coptic means Egyptian, And Christians living in Egypt identify themselves as Coptic Christian. For example, Mark was their founder and their first bishop, if you will. They're tied to the Catholics now, but also they honor her in her memory. And the Greek Orthodox Church includes her name in their list of saints, which is interesting. Beyond that, what is written here, we can be certain of actually little about her. Any thoughts or questions on her interaction with Pilate? Do you think it maybe influenced Pilate at all? I think it weighed upon his mind. I really do. Um, while this is going on, Pilate really underestimated the persuasive powers of the chief priests and the elders. And he had also miscalculated how the crowd felt about Barabbas. Look at verse 20. But the chief priests and elders persuaded the multitudes that they should ask for Barabbas and destroy Jesus. It's interesting that as detestable as Barabbas was as a human being, since he fought against the hatred Romans, this criminal may have been looked upon almost as a hero. Is what one author wrote about. In verse 21, the governor answered and said to them, "Which of the two do you want me to release to you?" They said, "Barabbas." They said, "Barabbas." Notice Pilate's response in verse 22 and 23. Pilate said to them, "What then shall I do with Jesus who is called Christ?" And they all said to him, "Let him be crucified." And again, here again, the governor said, "Why? What evil has he done?" But they cried out all the more, saying, "Let him be crucified." Picture in your mind the mob, and this is what it's turned into, a mob attitude. Mob continued to shout for the crucifixion of Jesus, getting louder and louder and louder. Their voices began to prevail. It had to be more and more obvious to Pilate that nothing but Jesus' death would satisfy the Jews. Yes, Virgil. Yeah, right. She had to change their mind. Yeah. Well, and what really makes you stand up and think is, remember just what, 5 days, 6 days before that, the triumphal entry where they let palm. Yeah. Oh yeah. And everybody, and all of a sudden within that short period of time. Yeah. 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 That's true. And yeah. So, hey, our time is up for this morning. We're going to stop right there and pick it up on Wednesday. Any final thoughts or comments? Yes, John. That he does. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly right. Yeah. Absolutely. All right. Thank you all for your comments. We'll pick it up here on Wednesday night, finish it up, and that should be good. Do, do try to listen to that link on the physical death of Jesus. I don't know. I'll ask Geraldine. I believe it is a website. Hey, Geraldine, that's a website, right? YouTube. Oh, YouTube. Called On the Physical Death of Jesus Christ.